and welcome to the Paletteful Packs YouTube channel. My name is Alice and today I have the October 2022 premiere Paletteful pack here in front of me, so let's go ahead and open it up and see what's inside. Ooh, so right away I see these Daler-Rowney FW inks. It looks like we're going to get 5 of them. We're going to get the primaries, Processed Cyan, Lemon Yellow, and Processed Magenta. And then we're also going to get a Emerald Green and a Sepia. So these are super useful. The FW acrylic inks are acrylic inks, so they're similar to watercolor, but they won't lift. And these are semi-translucent, so you can layer them up to be more opaque, but you can also use them in a translucent way to layer different effects in a similar way to use as using watercolor. So they're really, really versatile. I use these all the time in my own artwork. I use these on probably a daily basis. They're literally sitting on my desk right now. So I'm super excited to show you all the different ways that I use these inks. The next thing that I see in here is this Tombow Mono pencil. This is a 2H pencil. We love a good 2H pencil. They're great for using with watercolor or inks because the line it leaves isn't very dark, so it's not going to show through your paint once you paint over it, and it's not going to damage your paper if you try to erase it. It's a lot easier to erase on watercolor paper. And we have this super cute blue drippy watercolor vibe sticker, which totally matches the whole box. There's going to be a size 2 Robert Simmons Sapphire brush. This is a nice, fine, pointed brush that we can really use to get a lot of different details in, so that's going to be really, really fantastic. We're also going to have this size 4 Robert Simmons Sapphire brush, which is just 2 sizes up from the 2, so this is going to be a lot nicer for filling in larger areas. We're also going to have this Art Alternatives pigment liner. This is a 0.3 black liner. It is pigment based, so it should be water resistant, fade resistant, and archival. Love that. And then right here at the bottom, we are also going to have a paint palette with a bunch of different wells in here and a little thumb hole so we can hold it a little bit more easily if we want to mix all of our colors up. Finally, in here, we're going to have the surface. The surface is going to be down here at the bottom. So this is going to be the Stonehenge white cotton paper. It is 100% cotton. This is an 8x8, and it's 100% cotton, as I said, acid-free and heavyweight paper, and it offers a smooth, even surface with just a slight little tooth that's perfect for any watercolor, pen, ink, drawing, anything you really want to do on it. Okay, so this is everything that we're going to get in this month's Paletteful Premiere Pack. We have our 5 different FW inks. This is a great value for all of these inks. We've got yellow, blue, processed magenta, sepia, and green. We're gonna have our little sticker. We're gonna have our 2 sheets of watercolor paper. We've also got 2 brushes, a size 2 and a size 4, as well as the pencil, the palette, and the liner. So we've got so many different supplies to play with here. I can't wait to get started, so let's go ahead and make some art. So I wanted to use these inks in a bunch of different ways, so I decided to start by using them in a wet on wet way. So I got the entire paper wet with a spray bottle and my larger brush, and then I started dropping in the inks just from the dropper. I would definitely make sure that you mix up your inks really well before this, or else what will happen is what just happened to me, where I got a big chunk of pigment because I hadn't mixed up my ink properly, but I was able to pick it out and then spray it with some more water, and I got these beautiful bleeds. I think it looks so cool, and it was a really cool like background for the piece that I was making. So I just spent some time dropping in these blues, greens, and yellows because I knew I wanted to do a plant piece. So I thought this would create a nice background. I knew that I wanted to have this piece be very fluid and very organic, so I could see that these leaf shapes were starting to actually take place and create and like form through these puddles. So I used the pencil to establish more leaf shapes from the little like shapes that I saw that had gotten created from that first little step. So I used the pencil to just outline those so I could kind of see more where I was going to go, and I set up my palette to start painting the plants. The thing that I love so much about these inks is that they are acrylic inks, so that means that I could make this wet on wet image down at the bottom, and then I could paint over the top of it, and it wasn't going to mess up all of that wet on wet work that I did. It'll just layer right over the top of it, so you'll be able to see those bleeds and all of that beautiful texture come through. So I started to define these leaves by using some different green shades and getting in a little bit of shading that was just going to define where everything was. In order to mix the dark green, I mixed the green and the brown. Brown is great for darkening colors, and it really adds that earthy touch that I needed to make sure these leaves had that correct color. I also added in some blue and some yellow directly in there because if you look at a leaf, it's going to reflect lots of different colors. There's going to be parts that are more pure yellow, parts that are more pure blue, and then parts that are green. By adding in all of those different colors, I'm able to create something that looks a little bit more realistic and has more depth to it. No matter what you're doing, I always recommend mixing in different colors because it's just going to add so much more depth to your painting, and most things are not just one flat color. They reflect all of the colors of the world around them. That's how light works. So it's always best to add in lots of various colors. You can even add in red to green to help neutralize it and darken it as well because it's a complementary color. As you can see, I'm really taking a lot of my inspiration from the shapes that were created beforehand. One thing that I love about working with this type of method is it really frees you up from worrying about staying in the lines or things looking perfect, and it really allows the painting to kind of guide itself, and you can create some really cool images this way. In order to blend these, I'm adding in the color that I want, and then I'm just drying off the brush a little bit so that there's not as much paint on it. Then I mix it and kind of go softly at the edges with my brush to kind of feather those out, and then I'll mix in the color that it's blending into. And that's kind of how I work. A lot of times I will mix on the page, so I'll put one color down, then add another color on top of it. And it works really, really nicely, especially with these inks because they do blend into each other so well because they are super, super liquid. These paints are really, really highly pigmented because they are made with real artist quality pigments, and they are pretty opaque when you build them up. These paints aren't meant to be fully opaque on the first layer, and the reason for that is so that you can use them like watercolor inks and layer them up. But if you layer them up by like 2 layers, or if you just reach in and grab a little bit more of the pigment down at the bottom, then you'll get a much more opaque color. And that's how I'm using the inks for this top part where I'm adding in more shading and detail. I added in a little splatter of the yellow because I love a splatter, and then I wanted to do another kind of wet on wet piece on top. The reason that I'm able to do this is again because they're acrylic inks, so they're not going to like bleed or anything when I add water on top. So that means I can add water on top and add in all of these like yellow dots and fuzzies to add in just kind of some atmosphere. And I also wanted to add in a little bit more blue and green kind of covering and hiding parts of this. And then I'm going to paint back over the top again to kind of add in more detail and more shading. So it's kind of this process of constantly layering a wet on wet with adding in then more painting on top. And this is something that I do a lot in my personal artwork. I really love how it looks because it creates this really amazing layered image with a lot of different depth and texture. Now I'm using that smaller brush to go ahead and add in some fine details to the leaves now that I've added on that second wet on wet layer. I'm using a really dark green, and I'm just using the fine tip of that brush to add in some little veins to the leaves. This is going to add more realism and more detail, so it gives the eye a little bit more to look at. I'm also going to add in some yellow, and I'm going to use that to add in a little bit of highlight and shading on these leaves as well, just because when a leaf hits the light, the little veins do they have a little bit of a raisedness to them. They're a little raised. So by adding in those little highlights with the yellow, I'm able to capture that effect. These inks really are amazing for layering. As you can see, I'm able to layer and layer and layer with absolutely no issues. And because they are inks, the image stays really flat and you don't get all these thick brush strokes. I love thick brush strokes, but sometimes you just want something to be a little bit more flat, and these are perfect for that. If you like gouache and you like watercolor, these are something that are going to be really up your alley. They perform so much different than other acrylic paints, so they're a really, really interesting and unique supply. And I'm really excited to see what everybody else created with these because I think they're so much fun. I'm continuing to add in those highlights, and at this point I was kind of thinking about adding in another plant. I wasn't sure if just 2 of them was enough, but I decided that adding in a third one might look a little too busy, so I just kept working on popping the shading and adding more depth to those leaves because I really wanted them to have interest and not just blend into that background, because I love how like soft and washy and blended the background is, but because it's similar colors to the plants on top, I really needed to make sure that I added a lot of contrast to those plants so that they really stuck out. If you wanted to follow along with this project, another way that you could make the plants really like pop out from the page is to go around the edges with the black liner that we were given. I chose not to do that and I used the black liner to sign the piece, but it's a really great way to make it pop out, and I prefer adding line art afterwards because then you can really be free and expressive with your painting and not worry about painting in the lines. Towards the end, I really wanted to add a little bit more depth and darkness to the bottom of the piece, so I did another layer of water and ink, and I added some dark green to the bottom and some yellow overall to the page just to give it a glowy kind of sunny look. I signed it with the pen that we were given, and then I took off my tape and my piece was finished. I really love how this came out. Like I said, I love working with these inks. I think they're so much fun, and I'm really excited to see what everybody else made this month. I really hope this video was helpful for you and it gave you some different ideas as to different ways that you can use these inks, ways that you can layer them, and how to blend and shade with these inks. This is my final piece that I created with the October 2022 Paletteful Premiere Packs, and I really love how it came out. I think it's so cool and has so much texture and depth to it. If you'd like to get your own Paletteful packs, then definitely check the link in the description box below to go to our website for all the information that you need, and I will see you in the next one.